Okay, here we are with Little House on the Prairie. We're on chapter 5. And I'm going to show you this photo. There they are in their wagon. And the sun is just rising. Okay, chapter 5 is called The House on the Prairie. Laura and Mary were up the next morning, earlier than the sun. They ate their breakfast of cornmeal mush with prairie hen gravy and hurried to help Ma wash the dishes. Pa was loading everything else into the wagon and hitching up Pet and Patty. When the sun rose, they were driving on across the prairie. There was no road now. Pet and Patty waded through the grasses, and the wagon left behind it only the tracks of the wheels. Before noon, Pa said, "Whoa," and the wagon stopped. "Here we are, Caroline," he said. "Right here we'll build our house." Laura and Mary scrambled over the feed box and dropped to the ground in a hurry. All around them there was nothing but grassy prairie spreading to the edge of the sky. Quite near them to the north, the creek bottoms lay, below the prairie. Some darker treetops showed, and beyond them bits of rim of earth and bluffs. Far away to the east, a broken line of different green lays, and Pa said that was the river. "That's the Vertigus River," he said, pointing it out to Ma. Right away, he and Ma began to unload the wagon. They took out everything and piled it on the ground. Then they took off the wagon cover and put it over the pile. Then they took even the wagon box off, while Laura and Mary and Jack watched. The wagon had been home for a long time. Now there was nothing left of it but 4 wheels and the part that connected them. Pet and Patty were still hitched to the tongue. Pa took a bucket and his axe, and sitting on the skeleton of wagon, he drove away. He drove right down into the prairie and out of sight. "Where's Pa going?" Laura asked, and Ma said, "He's going to get a load of logs from the creek bottoms." It was strange and frightening to be left without the wagon on the high prairie. The land and the sky seemed too large, and Laura felt small. She wanted to hide and be still in the tall grass, like a little prairie chicken, but she didn't. She helped Ma while Mary sat on the grass and minded baby Carrie. First, Laura and Ma made the beds under the wagon tent. Then Ma arranged the boxes and bundles, while Laura pulled all the grass from a space in the front of the tent. That made a bare place for the fire. They couldn't start the fire until Pa brought the wood. There was nothing more to do, so Laura explored a little. She didn't want to go far from the tent, but she found a queer little kind of tunnel in the grass. You never noticed it if you looked across the waving grass tops, but when you came to it, there it was, a narrow, straight, hard path down between the grass stems. It went out into the endless prairie. Laura went along it a little way. She went slowly and more slowly, and then she stood still, for she felt queer. She turned and looked around and came back quickly. But when she looked over her shoulder, there wasn't anything there. But she hurried. When Pa came riding back on with a load of logs, Laura told him about the path. He said he had seen it yesterday. "Some kind of old trail," he said. That night by the fire, Laura asked Pa again when she would see a papoose, but Pa said he didn't know. He said you never saw Indians unless they wanted you to see them. He had seen Indians when he was a boy in New York State, but Laura never had. She knew they were wild men with red skins, and their hatchets were called tomahawks. Pa knew all about wild animals, so he must know about wild men too. Laura thought he would know all about a papoose and show her one someday, just as he had shown her fawns and bears and wolves. For days, Pa hauled logs. He made 2 piles of them, one for the house and one for the stable. Then there began to be a road where he drove back and forth to the creek bottoms. And at night, on the picket lines, Pet and Patty ate the grass till it was short and stubby all around the log piles. Okay, so now they're going to talk about Pa building the house. I'm going to show you the picture because this is what it looks like. So Pa is cutting notches in the logs, and he put it into a square, and now he's going to build and just pile logs higher and higher on each side. But he has to cut those notches in so they'll stay in place. So if you've ever played with Lincoln logs, those little toys that are logs, they have notches on them so that you can build with them. So it's similar to that. He has to make it. He's got to cut out those notches with his axe. Okay, Pa began with the house first. He paced off the size of it on the ground, and then with his spade he dug a shallow little hollow along two sides of the space. In these hollow he rolled the biggest logs. They were sound, strong logs because they must hold up the whole house. They were called sills. Then Pa chose two more strong, big logs, and he rolled those logs into the ends of the sills, and they made a hollow square. Now with his axe, he cut deep, wide notches near each end of the log. He cut these notches out of the top of the log, but with his eye he measured the sills and cut the notches so they would fit half around the sill. When the notches were cut, he rolled the logs over, and they fitted down into the sill. That finished the foundation of the house. It was one log high. The sills were half buried in the ground, and the logs on the ends fitted snugly to the ground. At the corners, they were crossed. The notches let them fit together so that they were no thicker than one log, and the two ends stuck out beyond the notches. Next day, Pa began the walls. From each side, he rolled up a log and notched its end so that it fitted down over the log ends. Then he rolled up logs from the ends and notched them so they fitted down. Now the whole house was 2 logs high. The logs fit solidly together at the corners, but no log is ever perfectly straight. And all logs are bigger at one end than the other, so the cracks were left between them all along the walls. But that didn't matter, because Pa said he would chink those cracks. All by himself, he built the house 3 logs high. Then Ma helped him. Pa lifted one end of a log onto the wall. Then Ma held it while he lifted the other end. He stood up on the wall to cut the notches, and Ma helped roll and hold the log while Pa settled it where it should be to make the corners perfectly square. So log by log, they built the walls higher and higher until the walls were pretty high and Laura could not climb over them anymore. She was tired of watching Pa and Ma build the house, and she went into the tall grass exploring. Suddenly, she heard Pa shout, "Let go! Get out from under!" The big, heavy log was sliding. Pa was trying to hold up an end of it to keep it from falling on Ma, but he couldn't. It crashed down. Ma huddled on the ground. She got to Ma as quickly as Pa did. Pa knelt down and called Ma in a dreadful voice, and Ma gasped, "I'm all right." The log was on her foot. Pa lifted the log, and Ma pulled her foot out from under it. Pa felt to see if any bones were broken. "Move your arms," he said. "Is your back hurt? Can you turn your head?" Ma moved her arms and turned her head. "Thank God," Pa said. He helped Ma sit up. She said again, "I'm all right, Charles. It's just my foot." Quickly, Pa took off her shoe and stocking. He felt her foot all over, moving the ankle and the instep and every toe. "Does this hurt much?" he asked. Ma's face was gray and her mouth was in a tight line. "Not much," she said. "No broken bones," said Pa. "It's only a bad sprain," Ma said cheerfully. "Well, a sprain will soon mend. Don't be so upset, Charles." "I blame myself," said Pa. "I should have used skids." So here's a picture of that scene. So you can see how the house is coming taller and taller, and then Ma was helping. The log slid. It's probably too heavy for her to hold it up high. And then it landed on her ankle, or her foot, I guess. He helped Ma into the tent. He built up the fire and heated water. When the water was as hot as Ma could bear, she put her swollen foot into it. It was providential that the foot was not crushed. Only a little hollow in the ground had saved it. Okay, so now we know that's like opposite of what we do. We put ice on things to stop the swelling. But I don't think they knew that then. So they put her foot in hot water. Pa kept pouring more hot water into the tub in which Ma's foot was soaking. Her foot was red from the heat, and puffed ankle began to turn purple. He took her foot out of the water and bound strips of rag tightly around the ankle. "I can manage," she said. She could not get her shoe on, but she tied more rags around her foot, and she hobbled on it. She got supper as usual, only a little more slowly. But Pa said she could not help to build the house until her ankle was well. He hewed out skids, These were long, flat slabs. One end rested on the ground, and the other end rested on the log wall. He was not going to lift any more logs. He and Ma would roll them up the skids. But Ma's ankle was not well yet. When she unwrapped it in the evening to soak it in hot water, it was still purple and black and green and yellow. The house must wait. Then one afternoon, Pa came merrily whistling up the creek road. They had not expected him home from hunting so soon. As soon as he saw them, he shouted, "Good news!" They had a neighbor only 2 miles away on the other side of the creek. Pa had met him in the woods. They were going to trade work, and that would make it easier for everyone. Okay, before we go on to find out about the neighbor, here's a picture of Ma tending to her foot. It'd be terrible to be hurt when you didn't have a doctor or medical care. All the stuff we have today, medicine to make you feel better, pain. He's a bachelor, said Pa. That means someone who's not married and has no kids. And he says he can get along without a house better than you and the girls can. So he's going to help me first. Then as soon as he gets his logs ready, I'll go over and help him. They need not wait any longer for the house, and Ma need not do any more work on it. How do you like that, Caroline? Pa asked joyfully, and Ma said, "That's good, Charles. I'm glad." Early the next morning, Mr. Edwards came. He was lean and tall and brown. He bowed to Ma and called her ma'am politely. But he told Laura that he was a wildcat from Tennessee. He wore tall boots and a ragged jumper and a coonskin cap. And he could spit tobacco juice farther than Laura had even imagined anyone could spit tobacco juice. He could hit anything he spit at, too. Laura tried and tried, but she could never spit so far or so well as Mr. Edwards could. He was a fast worker, and one day he and Pa built those walls as high as Pa wanted them. They joked and they sang while they worked, and their axes made the chips fly. On top of the walls, they set up a skeleton roof of slender poles. Then in the south wall, they cut a tall hole for a door, and in the west wall and the east wall, they cut square holes for windows. Laura couldn't wait to see the inside of the house. As soon as the tall hole was cut in it, she ran inside. Everything was stripped there. Everything was striped there. Stripes of sunshine came through the cracks in the west wall. Stripes of shadow came down from the poles overhead. There were stripes of shade and sunshine all across Laura's hands and her arms and her bare feet. And through the cracks between the logs, she could see stripes of prairie. The sweet smell of the prairie mixed with the sweet smell of cut wood. Then, as Pa cut away the logs to make the window hole in the west wall, chunks of sunshine came in. When he finished, a big block of sunshine lay on the ground inside the house. Around the door hole and the window holes, Pa and Mr. Edwards nailed thin slabs against the cut end of the logs, and the house was finished, all but the roof. The walls were solid, and the house was large, much larger than the tent. It was a nice house. Mr. Edwards said he would go home now, but Pa and Ma said he must stay for supper. Ma had cooked an especially good supper because they had company. There was stewed jackrabbit with white flour dumplings and plenty of gravy. There was a steaming hot, thick cornbread flavored with bacon fat. There was molasses to eat on the cornbread, but because this was a company supper, they did not sweeten their coffee with molasses. Ma brought out the little paper sack of pale brown store-bought sugar. Mr. Edwards said he surely did appreciate that supper. Then Pa brought out his fiddle. Mr. Edwards stretched out on the ground to listen. But first Pa played for Laura and Mary. He played their very favorite song, and he sang it. Laura liked it best of all because Pa's voice went deep, 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 deeper in that song. Oh, I'm a gypsy king, I come and go as I please. I put on my old nightcap down, I take the world at my ease. Oh, I am a gypsy king. Pa's voice went deep, deep down, deeper than the oldest bullfrog. They all laughed. Laura could hardly stop laughing. "Sing it again, Pa, sing it again," she cried. But before she remembered that children must be seen and not heard, so she was quiet. Pa went on playing, and everyone began to dance. Mr. Edwards rose up on one elbow, then he sat up, then he jumped up and danced. He danced like a jumping jack in the moonlight, while Pa's fiddle kept on rollicking, and his foot kept on tapping on the ground, and Laura's hands and Mary's hands were clapping together, and their feet patting too. "You're the fiddlingest fool I ever did see," Mr. Edwards shouted admiringly to Pa. He didn't stop dancing. Pa didn't stop playing. He played Monkey Musk and Arkansas Traveler and Irish Washerwoman and the Devil's Hornpipe. Baby Carrie couldn't sleep with all that music. She sat up in Ma's lap, looking at Mr. Edwards with round eyes and clapping little hands and laughing. Even the firelight danced, and all around the edges the shadows were dancing. Only the new house stood still and quiet in the dark, till the big moon rose and shone on its gray walls and the yellow chips around it. And here's a picture of that scene. So that's Mr. Edwards, their new neighbor. That's the house. They got it all built except for the roof. They have a door and windows. They've got a log house. That's going to be their little house on the prairie. Mr. Edwards said he must go. It was a long way back to his camp on the other side of the woods and the creek. He took his gun and he said goodnight to Laura and Mary and Ma. He said a bachelor got mighty lonesome, and he surely had enjoyed this evening of home life. "Play, Ingalls," he said. "Play me down the road." So while he went down to the creek road and walked out of sight, Pa played, and Pa and Mr. Edwards and Laura sang along with all their might. And this is the words of the song. "Old Dan Tucker was a fine old man. He washed his face in the frying pan. He combed his hair with a wagon wheel and died of the toothache in his heel. Get out of the way for old Dan Tucker. He's too late to get his supper. Supper is over and the dishes are washed. Nothing left but a piece of squash. Old Dan Tucker went to town, riding a mule, leading a hound." Far over the prairie rang Pa's big voice and Laura's little voice, and faintly from the creek bottoms came the last whoop of Mr. Edwards, who yelled, "Get out of the way for old Dan Tucker. He's too late to get his supper." When Pa's fiddle stopped, they could not hear Mr. Edwards any more. They could only hear the wind as it rustled in the prairie grasses. The big yellow moon was sailing high overhead. The sky was so full of light that not one star twinkled in it, and all the prairie was shadowy mellowness. Then from the woods by the creek, a nightingale began to sing. Everything was silent, listening to the nightingale's song. The birds sang on and on. The cool wind moved over the prairie, and the song was round and clear above the grasses whispering. The sky was like a bowl of light overturned on the flat black land. The song ended. No one moved or spoke. Laura and Mary were quiet. Pa and Ma sat motionless. Only the wind stirred and the grass sighed. Then Pa lifted the fiddle to his shoulder and softly touched the bow to the strings. A few notes fell like clear drops of water in the stillness. A pause, and Pa began to play the nightingale's song. The nightingale answered him. The nightingale began to sing again. The nightingale was singing along with Pa's fiddle. When the strings were silent, the nightingale went on singing. When it paused, the fiddle called to it, and the nightingale sang again. The bird and the fiddle were talking to each other in the cool night under the moon. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. They have their little house on the prairie now. So, and Mr. Edwards becomes more and more of a important person in their life. And he's a great character. I love Mr. Edwards. Okay, I'll read for you guys again tomorrow.